speaking to you from beautiful Philadelphia. Imagine that you're living in a time before science fiction. Imagine that you are one of these people who lives in a time when technologies are opening up all these possibilities, and for the first time in humanity, it is on people's minds the idea of space travel and limitless power and technology-enabled telepathy and the idea that through contraptions and through scientific know-how, these powers and these whole new worlds could actually possibly be opened up to people. And for a writer, just pretend for a moment that you're a writer living in this time, thinking of this whole new territory of working creatively, and that there are so many ideas of new stories that could be made that haven't been made yet, and that it's a cornucopia of an abundance of original ideas and stories so out of the blue that have never been done before. And you feel that you have a wealth of creativity just waiting, begging you to go out there and start writing those stories. I think there are writers who have found themselves in that circumstance, some of the early science fiction writers, and people today who have an understanding of current science feel those possibilities open up to them. People who write cyberpunk novels and understand nanotechnology, and they feel these new possibilities of creativity opening up to them, very much the way this new territory of science fiction must have seemed to people who lived before a time when those stories have been written, where those different scenarios have been played out in different story forms. The science fiction writer of today, a lot of the times, will find themselves working. If there's a story about space travel, how many stories involve space travel? A lot. And so that sense of great newness, of more original story ideas and story content to work with than we could ever use in a lifetime. That must have been just wonderful to the early science fiction writers. It must have just, imagine for an artist to have that abundance of original material and possibility. It must have really just been great. I like to think about that because it helps me to understand creativity a little bit more. So let's just imagine that we have someone, this character. He or she is not necessarily the greatest writer, but they do understand, they are aware of this great possibility of new stories, that they have a niche, they have they can go and read the scientific journal and look at this new submarine technology, and they can get these ideas for these stories that have never been written before. And besides the fact that the story may be taking place in a whole new kind of world, a whole new genre, involving circumstances characters have never been in before. The characters themselves may not be as well fleshed out as Tolstoy's characters. The dialogue may not be as insightful and hilarious as other writers have written, but they have found one thing, and that is finding an original premise for a story. Often studies about creative writing look at the finished product. It's like an anatomy of the story, the finished story. But I propose that we look at the anatomy of how a story is created. Instead of categorizing stories by genre and the 7 different basic plots and that sort of thing, let's categorize stories by where they come from. A person who is familiar with the creative process can look at any story and get a sense of where that story came from. Imagination is not something that is an extra to the human way of thinking. It isn't something that some people have and some people don't. Imagination is something that all people use all the time. Essentially, it is how we simulate the real world. We know the real world through the imaginative powers in our brain, taking in nerve stimulation and creating a model of the physical world in our mind, so that we can carry out the actions our physical bodies do to interact in the physical world. Imagination is also an essential way that the subconscious works. So basically, we're creating stories all the time. We create stories about things our friends say when we aren't there. We create stories about what's going to happen tomorrow if we don't turn off the stove. We're playing out these imagined scenarios, and it's another way that ultimately we can keep our physical bodies alive in the physical environment. So I want to introduce to you a category of fiction, of stories. This category is the what-if story. You're not going to go through a single day without making many what-if stories. And that's basically, what if I didn't show up for work today? What if my mother-in-law calls? There are a lot of stories out there, and we can tell just by the feel of the story that they are what-if stories, that they come about out of wondering, what if? What if someone creates a potion that makes them invisible? What if 2 people who annoy the hell out of each other are trapped on a desert island together? What if there is a super deadly virus outbreak in a time when intercontinental travel and the ability for viruses to move from nation to nation is very possible and very likely? One of the most amazing qualities about these what-if questions is that they don't just spawn one story. For every what-if, there are hundreds of stories. It opens up a whole new world of possibility. It can lead us to wonder. It depends so much on the characters, the circumstances. Let's take the Invisible Man what-if question. Someone creates a potion that makes them invisible. The most famous story played out with certain character traits, determining how that story would play out and determining how different what-if circumstances arose in the story. But we can take the same what-if and have it applied to what if back in the 1930s someone in the mafia discovered that there was a scientist who accidentally made himself invisible but jumped to support that traumatized scientist and gave him an amazing lab to work in as long as this invisible Invisible Man would go out and commit mob crimes. One thing I am trying to get at here is that let's get creative. When we go to work on creative fiction, the first thing we should do is work on becoming creative, on getting creative. So many writers, when they go to write, a lot of the times they start working in ways that can shut down creativity. And these are all the important things of critiquing the work we've done, refining it. A writer should develop just as many ways of generating new material as they do refining the material they have. Every time you sit down for a writing session, make sure, I usually do this at the beginning. I start off with working as creatively as possible and using all the tools of creativity. And it's only in the second half of a writing session that I work on be-verbs and wondering in dialogue if it really sounds like how that character would speak, that sort of thing. So when we look at the anatomy of how a story gets made, we can look at, you have the starting, the point of origin, the what if question, and it from there it branches out to all these different scenarios, this whole new world of possibility where we don't even, it really all depends on the characters that we choose to play out the what if scenario. But I really want to focus on that spark, that point of origin, the what if point. And if we develop really strong tools for working with that first initial stage of story creation, it will amplify how our abilities at all the other stages of creating a story, down to the very end when we're refining it and making little adjustments and moving the commas around. So don't just listen to what I say. Do this exercise. These words are just going to be little ripples of intellectual enjoyment. The practice is completely different than just hearing what I have to say. By doing it, you're going to put yourself into an environment of activity that is going to be so much of a greater benefit than just listening to what I have to say. The exercise is basically choose a number of times. Do this for a whole year, where once a day you spend a couple of minutes coming up with a new what-if scenario. Set this exercise up any way you feel like it for 30 days. Each day, all you're going to do is come up with a new what-if scenario. You're not going to play out where that scenario could go. It's just that question. It is the what-if question. I'll read to you some ones I made today just as examples. And I just did this just today, so it's... Okay. What if everyone in the world lost their ability to speak? What if everyone in the world became too afraid to go outside? What if a new kind of creature too fast for anyone to see or find out about started stealing people away each night? What if a global earthquake broke all the land masses into islands? What if the world's richest people started being murdered and no one could find out who was doing it? Invisible Man, maybe? I don't know. what if people found a way to join brains into a super brain group so that there were large groups of people that acted all as one person? What if someone lucid dreamed every night and found that if they explored far enough they could wander into other people's dreams? What if all the plant life on Earth started to grow 100 times faster than it does, and all of a sudden these jungles started erupting everywhere? What if all the planes all around the world started disappearing soon after they took flight? What if everyone the world over, except for the protagonists, suffers from mass amnesia? They just can't remember who they are. Or... As a side note, I've got I'm working on my story terrible immunity, and it is, I need to spend so much time with it. I'll never get around to the what ifs I just told you, so feel it's yours. If you please, if you have any interest in using all or parts of any of those, please do. That would be great. But do you see what I'm doing here? When I'm working creatively, I'm limiting what kind of creative work I'm going to do. I'm only going to work on the what if question, that spark, that origin point, that all what if stories expand out from. You want to get back to that point, and this is a tool, a creative tool for you, where you're going to work. You know, a strong person doesn't get strong just because. They work, they go out, and they walk, they lift things. It makes us stronger. When you set out, and not just one time, but each day, come up with a new what if. Creativity thrives in limitation. Don't start playing out the what if scenarios yet. Just work on the what if and limit yourself to that and see how many different what ifs you can come up with. Brainstorm one new one each day, but for many, many, many days. Think of this as a creative tool and concentrate on it. Ask yourself, how good am I at coming up with new what if scenarios? And as a writer, challenge yourself. Forget about all other aspects of writing, and there are many. Keep this exercise in its own separate place. Have your own journal or section of a journal for what if scenarios. And if there's one that is just begging you to turn it into a story, do that somewhere else, but make yourself very aware of how good you are at coming up with one of these new what if scenarios, one each new day, and continue to work on it. The same way a runner goes out and runs each day, and they are well aware at how good they are at doing that one thing. It's helpful to appreciate that what we're doing here is deeply ingrained in our subconscious. Throughout our day, we're playing out what-if scenarios all the time. It's how we are effective in the world. We're at work and we're told to hurry up and finish what we're doing. A what-if scenario. What if I don't do a completely great job so I can finish sooner? And we play out that scenario in our mind and we're like, no, we just have to hurry, and because we know that it's going to be inspected and reflect, and so we're playing out the what-if scenario. But one of the odd things about humanity is that, okay, then we get these scenarios like, what if someone builds a machine that can fly? So when you're thinking of fictional what-if scenarios, yes, it's great to just get as far out there as possible, as fantastic, as as strange, as unexpected as possible. But also it's helpful to really consider it. You know, the way when you're at work, when you ask, what if I only do 90% on this job, you're really considering it as possible. When you ask yourself, what if someone makes a potion that can turn you invisible, you really kind of for a minute really try to believe, well, what if it really did happen? And remember, if I'm going to categorize stories for what creative process it took to create that story, I think that the what if story is just one category. I'm sure that there are other stories that come about due to a completely different mode of imagination. Now, the types of questions you ask, I know that mine really veer towards the scientific genre, but really this exercise can be used in whatever style of writing you're doing. If you're a romance writer, it's just a different focus. I would imagine that your what ifs would be something like, what if one of the people in the relationship can't form a relationship because they were in and out of foster homes growing up. The strange thing about life is that circumstances that affect everyone can play out in drastic ways, sometimes for trivial reasons. And so you could go back and you could say, what if the Germans were who won World War II? I could go on about the benefits and the new world of creative writing, the new modes of creative writing that can be discovered by this kind of creative practice and by becoming better at using this creative tool. But really, you're going to discover them on your own. If you make this part, if you take this tool and put it in your writer's toolbox, if you start using it, it'll start you on, it'll make it so that you will be continually improving as a writer for every year that you write. I'll say it again just because this is something people are more likely to forget than other things. It's that don't be critical when you're doing this. If you come up with a new what if, don't automatically shut yourself down. Go ahead and put it down on the paper. Do it just like an exercise. Don't critique it. Don't tear it down before it has a chance to live, because even if you come up with a what if that is not so great, there is part of it that is. And the thing about creativity is that the more mistakes you make, the better you become. Mistakes in creative processes are a completely different thing than what they are in normal life. Mistakes are basically not fully formed content, and most of the time there's no other way that original content is going to be born at all if it isn't first not fully formed. So you need to make the more mistakes the better, because basically what they are, you need to make them in the physical world before you have a chance to really look at them and find the good parts. I hope this has been helpful. If you got something from this video and want to get me back, please hit the like button, subscribe, leave a comment, tell a friend, and if you want to be a super viewer of my videos, you can share one of them through Twitter or one of the other ways of sharing YouTube videos. That would be great. If you did that, that would encourage me to make so many more of these videos. If you're feeling at all curious, please take the time to go check out my illustrated storytelling at solomation.com. It is bizarre alternate reality fiction put in episodes. You can view them for free. I hope you come up with tons of wonderful new what-if premises for stories, and it helps you in your creative work. I hope your writing goes great, and have a good day.